Hi, I'm Johan Olsson and I'm representing SensoDetect. We are working with improving the lives of people with mental illness. As you probably know, the mental illness in the world is a huge problem. So we are developing a solution to improve the life of people with mental illness through an objective test. We want to integrate this test into the normal assessments that the doctors do as an objective extra assessment that they can use in their diagnosis. As you probably know, there is a long queue in most countries for getting a diagnosis and especially for getting a treatment. Most diagnosis is set in a subjective way. They are doing ordinary questionnaires and assessment forms and many meetings with doctors and psychologists to set a diagnosis. It's not uncommon that it takes 1-2 years to get the first diagnosis to be set. And it's not that uncommon that they also, after getting a diagnosis, seeks new tests and do a reassessment of their diagnosis as a patient. The cost for the community is, of course, quite high, and the people suffering from mental illness often have problems with sick leaves and financial problems and so on. So the mental illness is a huge global problem. We have at any time about 450 million people suffering from mental illness in the world. Suffering from mental illness is a problem, of course, for the private person, but it's also a problem for the surrounding family and friends, since they are also affected in many ways. And as I said, they have a lot of problems, generally, with shorter lifespan, the risk for suicide. They have economic problems and so on, which makes this a very important target group. So the cost of setting a diagnosis is quite high, it takes quite a lot of time, and it's quite complex. In addition to this, it's the costs for the society and the person himself, and of course in employment, retirement, early retirement, sick leaves and so on. The estimate for the EU is about 4% of the GMP, which in the US is about $148 billion, which is quite a lot of money. But it's also a local problem. We must remember that the mental illness problem is not only for the one that is actually sick. It affects people surrounding. If you have a child with ADHD, for example, then it's very common that you also have a parent that is somewhat sick or stressed out or have a problem that will result in economical difficulties for the whole family. This picture is from a newspaper here in Sweden. It says cut the queues and diagnosis time to get to treatment of ADHD. What I want to show with this is that this senior doctor from north of Sweden says it's a huge problem for society that it takes 30-40 hours to get to a diagnosis. And then you should remember that 30-40 hours is not in a sequence. You have a lot of waiting time between this, so therefore it will be 1, maybe 2 years until you get the set of a diagnosis and can start the treatment. So what can we use our technology for? Well, it's a test, it's not a diagnosis, it's a test that gives you a first proof or somewhat an idea of what is the problem. So in the first step we show the doctor that it's typical deviations, for example, for ADHD or for schizophrenia or for autism. Then the doctor can send the patient into further specialist treatment and diagnosis. And in the next step, they can use it in depth for, together with other assessments, to make sure that they get the best set of diagnosis that is possible. And in the next step, we can also make sure and see the effect of the treatment in form of medications. We can see the difference before and after you have taken the medication to the treatment. So it makes it much faster, much easier, and much simpler, and it's objective. It's always the same result from our system. So this is the objective results that Bera gives you. Fast and reliable, it takes about 30 minutes. And you can do a follow-up test and see if there is any difference after taking the medication. This is the huge benefit, that you can actually see if the tablet you take have any effect at all. So what are we offering? The product itself looks like this. It's a system that measures the brainstem's response to sound, and it's a clicking sound, very easy. But we then get a curve or the data that we can analyze and see the deviations from a healthy control group and also the different diagnosis groups. So we can see and plot the differences to the doctor to make it easier for her or him to set a diagnosis. It's also included in this system an assessment form, which is the basis for all psychology assessments today. We have included a digital version of these assessment forms so that you get this as well as our data. And in the end, everything is set with our algorithms to show the doctors the report on deviations from the brainstem and also the results from a standard assessment form. So we offer the assessment form, which is the standard. When they come to us or to the clinic, they will get a headphone. They will get 2 electrodes in the forehead, one behind the ear and one on the arm. They will sit down in a chair, resting, or if they like, sleeping. Before they go to sleep, they need to do the assessment form, of course. They have a 5-minute break where they do the assessment form. Then we start the measurement. The measurement takes 15 minutes. After that, the patients can go home and the doctor will receive the results. This is the workflow. The patient goes for a test, sends to our systems, which is analyzed and sent to the doctor, not to the treater or the test person, because the doctor will have to assess the results, of course, and also weigh in other assessment forms and so on, and maybe a psychologist's interpretation of the patient and so on. After that, they will tell the patient, of course, the diagnosis, and they will go on to treatment and maybe do a new Bera test to see if the treatment works. But also, very important for us is that we want the doctor to send us the information back so that we can get the actual diagnosis they have set. This is to improve our AI algorithm, of course, so that we make better and better analysis of the data. So the new option for the doctors are an objective test that can show the deviations in the brainstem for different type of mental illness, but also, of course, for the healthy. So if you have a typical healthy curve, then you shouldn't maybe be prioritized in the system. It's better to prioritize the ones that have the deviations for different mental illnesses. So what we want to help them with is, of course, to give them an objective test that is cost-effective, very fast and reliable. This will make it possible for the help of the patient very swift and soon, and reduce the cost of mental illness as a whole for society and, of course, for the health sector and, of course, also for the patient. Why have we the assessment form as well? Well, we think that since this is a standard in almost all assessment of the patient and diagnoses, they do assessment forms. We want to include that mostly for the doctor's recognition that they are used to having this. And this is normally in paper way today, so therefore we have included it as in the digital way. But it's also a security for us to see that we are setting the right diagnoses. So, faster, more reliable, more cost-effective, may also detect the medication effects, which is a huge market, and Every time we do an analysis, it's the same result, which is the objective way. You cannot influence this as a patient. You can sleep, you can be awake, it doesn't matter, you get the same result. So, the business model for this is quite simple. We don't sell BERA systems. We take a small fee for every test. And we set out the BERA system to the clinics if they sign up for about 600 tests at least a year. Of course, we also have some disposable items and services that we can provide. Mostly this is the distributor making money from this part. And we also have systems that can be used in further research, which is for us quite important because we, of course, want to find more usable waste for the BERA system. And remember that the market, 450 million people are suffering at any time from some kind of mental illness. We have concentrated on ADHD, autism and schizophrenia in this first part. This represents about 0.08%, which is a very small number, but it adds up to quite a lot of money if we do about 3 tests per patient. So, what is the revenue? Well, as I said, we set out a machine to the clinic if they sign up for about 600 tests a year. The average income from every test is about 100 to 200 US dollars. Why so wide spectra? Well, it depends, of course, on where in the world we put the machine. It's a bit less in the third world countries and a bit higher here in the Nordic countries. For achieving a positive result for SensoDetect, we estimated that we need about 20 machines put on the market to make a positive result in the next year. Someone always asks, how many tests can you do with the BERA system? Well, in theory, about 17,000. If you are even close to this, I would suggest that you use more than one. This is if you use it all around the clock every day, 24 hours, 7 days a week. But the average we expect to be around 1,200 tests a year. This is how we will intend to go to market. We will start with the tests of ADHD, schizophrenia and autism, as I said. We will start in Bolivia, where we have a distributor that is very keen on getting started, so therefore we are starting there. We also have assignments in UK, here in the Nordics, South Korea, and we are also looking at the German market. And it's only test for the diagnosis aid at this time. In the next step, we will expand, of course, to other countries, but also add some more of the diagnosis, hopefully, as soon as possible for depression, OCD and ADD, where we have markers already that we need to find out if they are good enough to release in the next phase. And also add the medical test, which is quite an interesting market for the BERA system. And then further expansion 2024 to other countries and also hopefully to North America. As I said, the market for this, as I presented, is about around 300 million people, and there is quite a difference between how many in the staff you find in psychology and the mental illness market, and the need is quite high in all countries. The evidence for this system, we have a test done or study done in Uppsala University a couple of years ago showing that we have a very high sensitivity and specificity, above 80% on this system. We of course have our own studies also, concluding that we can sort out and help the doctor with assessments with very high sensitivity and specificity. We of course have protected this system, so we have an IP in most countries, most major markets. And to summarize, I would like to show you a video, very short. And let's see if it works like this. Yeah.
It's more common than you might think. And 1 in 5 suffers from a mental illness during their lifetime. The impact on patients and near ones is profound, and the cost to society are tremendous. SensoDetect provides a solution to these challenges. Different diagnoses of mental illness are related to different parts of the brainstem. The patented BioStock technology stimulates brainstem response by presenting click sounds through headphones while registering the data via electrodes. The data is translated into a detailed so-called ABR curve. The patient's curve is then compared and analyzed to indicate the likely diagnosis, if any. This information will complement existing tools during assessment by a doctor. Our technology is proven by research. A blind study at Uppsala University Hospital has concluded that the ABR profiling test discriminated schizophrenia and ADHD versus healthy controls with high sensitivity and specificity. BioStock technology is an aid to help the doctor improve the objectivity and efficiency of setting the diagnosis. This reduces the lead times in the healthcare system and the cost to society as a whole. But first and foremost, it improves the lives of people suffering from mental illness.
Very brief summary, and here is the summary for the presentation today. As I said before, we will do a market introduction next year. We will focus on Bolivia, UK and Sweden. We will receive a positive result according to plan 2020. If we launch as planned, maybe we can do it a bit faster, but this is the plan we have communicated before. We are ready with the system. We are doing a validation for the new BioStock 3.1 in Bolivia and Ukraine and here in Sweden. Our engine, our algorithm is of course always updating, making it even better and better. And the reporting system will be also included with the assessment form, which is quite new. The next step is the treatment check, as I said, to see the effect of the medication, which is a huge market as well, parallel to the diagnosis. So that was my presentation. If you'd like to follow information from us, please look at our website or check in with our stock market spotlight. So, SensoDetect, working with improving the lives of people with mental illness. Thank you.
Thank you, Johan. Very interesting presentation. You mentioned 600 tests per year is what you will demand for putting out one of your units for free in a clinic. Sounds like it should be a no-brainer for the clinics to do that, actually, to take that deal.
Yeah.
But
it's very low.
It's very low, yeah. What are the main thresholds that you can foresee in as far as boosting the market uptake when you launch? What are the main challenges, so to speak?
Well, the challenge is, of course, that this market of mental illness and psychology, they don't use technology very much. In neurology, it's very common to use technology. In the psychology area, not so much. But we are seeing that more and more they are using technology and also, of course, open to new ways to improve and speed up the process, because they are struggling with long queues all over the world and have a huge problem with not being able to handle all patients.
Mm. And the issue of mental health issues or mental illness is a growing problem. That's the trend is showing. But I was curious about the markets you've chosen to enter first. Bolivia, UK and Sweden, quite disparate if you ask me.
Yeah.
What's the strategy behind that?
don't forget that we also are looking for South Korea, so that we are really in the wide spectrum. Well, when I started 2 years ago with SensoDetect, we got a message from one of the distributors in Latin America and South America, which is based in Bolivia. And they were so keen on this product, and I thought, okay, let's see, what do you have and what is the situation in Bolivia? And they are quite advanced in, so to say, they get their medical degree often in the European countries, so they are quite advanced, but they have very few people in this sector. So they want the technology to expand and to advance and to help the citizens of Bolivia. And also the distributor sees the potential, of course, to the whole market. So therefore we are in Bolivia. Otherwise it would be very strange to start in Bolivia.
Yeah. And as far as Sweden goes, are you working with certain key opinion leaders to break the way, so to speak?
We have some in our own board, of course, and also we are picking out some clinics that we are going to work with in the launch, which we haven't told the market yet, so I'm sorry I can't mention them here, but we will of course try as soon as we can launch the system also.
And as far as the business model goes, what about reimbursement? Is that going to be an issue in different markets, or?
You mean from the society and the healthcare system? That is quite different in different countries. And therefore we are actually doing different in different countries, of course. So it's impossible to answer that with a short question, but of course everybody wants to keep down the costs. Because this is a huge problem. And the problem is also that even if you get a diagnosis as a patient, they tend to not really believe the diagnosis and go to the next doctor and try to get a reassessment, and they can do that several times, since there is no paper to show them. If you break your arm, you can show them a picture of the arm. Here you cannot show them any pictures because it's a subjective, even though very accurate assessment, but still the doctor wants something to show the patient, so that patient can feel safe to take the treatment. So there is a huge advantage to have something to show them.
We're going to open up for, is there any questions in the audience? Anyone wants to like to pose a question? Please go ahead.
How about the study? What are the real facts behind the effectiveness of BERA?
The Uppsala University study concluded 83.7%, I think, above 80%, which is quite much higher than, for example, assessment forms, which average around 70%. But the important thing is that in that study they also concluded that we didn't point out anyone that is healthy as sick. So we can point out 85 out of 100 roughly that is sick, but we won't point out anyone that is healthy as sick, which is quite important.
How big was the study?
A couple of hundred.
I have a question. Is it possible to only use the machine to detect mental illnesses, or do you need to do the test as well, the other test?
This is a good question, and a very common question, because that will of course be very interesting to have a machine that sets a diagnosis. But as you probably know, there is no machine in the world that sets diagnoses for any illness. That's the doctor's job. It could be a help, like when you do an X-ray or something like that, but it won't set the diagnosis for you. That's the doctor's job. But it will be an aid for him or her to set a diagnosis easier.
Well, as the development continues, who knows? There might be a robot doing that as well. Thank you very much, Johan, for the presentation. I think we should give him a warm hand.